Hello, thank you so much for joining this webinar, our second webinar on networking. And I'm hoping that you have had a chance to step through each of our webinars in the order that they are presented on the portal, because as we spoke about when we first talked about this program, each of these sessions are a build of information and skills, one to the next. So I just want to introduce myself again. I am Lisa Perez. I am the founder and CEO of Prosperity Ready, and I'm really blessed to be able to do the work that we are doing, which is helping degreed immigrant professionals acquire the jobs that they are qualified for and deserve. I spent over 25 years in human resources in very large organizations, and so I had an upfront seat to the barriers that people face, our BIPOC community face when they are looking for careers. And I realized after I started working with the immigrant community that I had inadvertently built in some of these barriers under the guise of best practice. And so I'm happy to be doing this work now. I am so happy that you are joining us, and I hope that you have so far gotten some great information out of the previous webinars. So today we are going to continue our conversation on networking. Networking is so important that we have 2 sessions devoted to it. So hopefully you had a chance to see David Meiji and Rosie Sarpong Owens delivering their impression management and just kind of the foundational things that we need to be thinking about in terms of impression management and networking. And I'm going to be referencing what they talked about quite a bit tonight throughout this particular session. As you learned in the previous webinar, in the state of Minnesota, 70% of professional positions are landed through networking. And I hope that you've had a chance to look through David's process on how to really think about your network strategically. Who can you identify? Who can you meet with first who may be a little more forgiving if you're not quite ready or you're not comfortable? So I encourage all of you, if you haven't yet, to go back to that session and click on those resource buttons where there are forms and documents that can help you really think through, kind of pencil to paper, how you are going to construct your network. So tonight we're going to deep dive into how to connect or conduct a win-win networking meeting. As we always do, I am going to start sharing my screen. And we are going to jump into our learning objectives. We feel strongly at Prosperity Ready that it's important to anchor what we talk about each session in specific learning objectives. And hopefully you're also filling out the learning assessments, which is really important on a couple of fronts. So the reason we have learning assessments attached to every webinar is because it helps you rethink through the learning objectives and what did you get out of watching the webinar. And that's especially important when you're watching something online, to have that reinforcement afterwards. So that physical activity of connecting what you heard to answering questions online. The other reason the learning objective or the learning of assessments are really important to us is because people who donate to this program so that it can be free for our participants, they want to see and they deserve to see that our participants are learning and mastering the objectives around how to pursue a professional career in terms of their job seeker skills. So that's the why behind why we ask you to fill out those learning assessments. They're short. They shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. And we really, really appreciate your cooperation in filling those out. So, our learning objectives tonight: how do you leverage your network? How do you understand best practice process for securing and conducting a networking meeting that yields results? We're going to talk a lot about how difficult this process can be and how to approach somebody for a networking meeting where it's truly a win-win situation. We're going to talk a little bit about how to strategically structure your time during a networking meeting. And we're going to talk about this in a moment, but I strongly recommend that you read cover to cover Marcia Ballinger's and Nathan Perez's book on the 20-minute networking meeting for professionals. It has a multitude of information. And the thing that I personally like about the book is that it gives very step-by-step processes, and it gives templates that we can use to plan our networking meetings. And then after we have a meeting, to debrief with ourselves so that we know what next steps we want to take and how we want to improve. So you should have received that book along with Richard Dodson's book, The Art of Tactful Self-Promotion in the Workplace, in your welcome packets. And again, highly encourage you to read every page at least once. I've read the book probably 5 times, and I still get good information from it. So what is networking? It's a very common term in the United States. It's a very common term in terms of job seekers within the United States. And it's basically getting information from other people, obtaining information from others. It's also just practically a brief meeting where you are gathering the information that you need to achieve your job search goals. And there are many reasons to network, but today we're really going to focus on networking in the context of a job search for a professional position. So who should be networking? Students, veterans, entrepreneurs, anyone seeking a job, and anyone who works with others to do their job. So that is basically everyone. And then the question comes, who should you network with? Again, I'm going to refer back to David Magy's list, his process that is in our resources on the website. He gives a really good, very comprehensive list, which I'm not going to read all of it. But the thing I like about David's list is that it lists groups of people that I had never thought of before I started using his approach. So you should be thinking about networking with relatives, friends, clients, customers, vendors, professional colleagues, classmates, professors, just general acquaintances, any members of a religious affiliation that you might be acquainted with. So your synagogue, a church, a mosque, members and clergy neighbors. And then any professional association members that you might belong to. And that's a very short list. So again, David's got a very long list that is really helpful in terms of thinking through, like, oh my goodness, this is somebody I already know. How do I then take Marcia and Nathan's information and turn that into an agenda for a really good networking meeting? I don't know about you, but for me personally, I'm an introvert. When I'm talking about Prosperity Ready, and when I'm talking about you know, other people's goals and other organizations' work, I'm very outgoing. But when it comes to me just personally, I do not find networking an easy thing to do, which is one of the reasons I found Marcia and Nathan's processes so helpful, because I could put it down on pen and paper. I could type it up and walk in with a really well thought out agenda. But I just want to share with you all, networking is easier than you think. it's really about relationship building. So if you think about it as meeting someone and trying to make a meaningful connection with them, sometimes that can take the intimidation out of the whole idea of it. And honestly, you've been doing it all along. So let me give you some examples of how you've already been networking and you might not even know it. So first of all, people hire people, not our technology. So although, as you learned in David and Rosie's session, we do rely on technology to make those, and in most cases, to make those initial introductions. And we need to be careful about how we use technology. We need to be precise and make sure we've got people's names correct and we've got the correct name of who introduced us to the person that we're sending an email to. So just so that we're making the best first impression, if we reach out via email, if we're in an in-person setting, like these gentlemen here, who came to Prosperity Ready's very first fundraiser, if we are meeting face to face, we also want to be really prepared and we want to have our introduction about ourselves and what we can offer in terms of value to an organization. We want to have that ready to go. Because at the end of the day, it is about relationship building. And again, you have been doing it all along. So think about going to a friend's birthday party and meeting someone for the first time that you've never met. Just think about, like, what do you say? How do you introduce yourself to them? How do you shake their hand, or how do you just greet them? So you're networking in that moment. Think about meeting new people at your church or your place of worship. What does that look like? Is there a gathering afterwards that you've maybe attended where you are socializing or networking? How does that look? How do you introduce yourself in that moment? And then another example might be for those of us who are parents or are caretakers of children. What does it look like when you're at a school function and you're meeting people for the first time? So those are all common day examples where we are networking and we just might not even be conscious of the fact that we are networking. But the reason I bring this up is that reflecting on those instances when you've been doing it all along might help take some of the anxiety or nervousness out of a formal networking meeting that you are the one who's initiating it. And I think that's maybe one of the big differences is when you're in a social setting, you're mingling. When you initiate a network meeting, then you're in charge. You're in charge, and we're going to talk about how you can prepare and show your potential and put your best foot forward. So, what are some of the reasons that we don't network? It can feel like asking for a favor, which can be really uncomfortable, especially if you don't know the other person. I always worry about people's time. Like, do they really have time to give me 20 or 30 minutes in their day? We also are concerned with, are we trying to oversell ourselves? Are we being pushy? Are we going to have to name drop? And then, like I mentioned earlier, if we're more on the shy or introverted side, it can be very uncomfortable. And I will say that also, if we come from a culture where talking about how great you are and the value you can add to an organization and what your accomplishments have been in your career, if that's something that is outside of your cultural norms, that can be very uncomfortable as well. So networking is, by and large, a construct that was created in the United States primarily by executive white males. And so this is something that we all need to learn. If we come from different backgrounds, where that sort of conversation and introducing yourself very assertively is just not part of our value system. So why don't other people network? Here are the top 3 reasons: because it's not focused, and it becomes more social than kind of goal oriented, and it becomes more social than kind of a give and exchange of information that could help both parties. There's no agenda, so it's hard to kind of track where things are going to go and what is the outcome going to be. And then when we're networking and we take more time than what we had scheduled or promised, that can be a really big turnoff. And a couple meetings like that can cause busy leaders just to say, you know what, I'm not giving any of my time to networking with anyone. So there are 3 things you want to achieve in a networking meeting. You want to gather a little bit of information that's going to help you move your job search forward. You want to ask at the end, and we're going to go through a 5-step process. You want to ask at the end for names who could help you expand your networking efforts. And then you want to make sure that the person that you're meeting with, you're going to garner their support so they become somebody who is willing to continue to help you in your job seeker efforts. So how do you go about that? I would say the biggest success factor in a successful networking meeting is your preparation. And again, the networking book has all of this laid out, and preparing ahead of time is going to help you tremendously. And I will say, the first time I used the networking book's process to prepare a networking meeting, it felt like it took me a lot of time. It felt like a ton of work. And the second time I did it, it felt easier. Third, fourth time, it was so much easier, and I felt so much more confident having a structured way to go about my networking meetings. So first of all, you want to be sure to set a professional tone for the meeting, for the impression you create. And again, this is about relationship building. So focus on the relationship, not what you're going to get from the other person. So in terms of setting a professional tone, there's pre-work you need to do. You need to think about, and we'll get into this, but your agenda, what questions are you going to ask, doing your homework, thinking about how much time do you need to get to this meeting? How far in advance should you leave? What are you going to wear? We recommend, and if you watched our resume writing and our upcoming, hopefully you also make it to our upcoming interview session, always dress one step more formal than you think the attire of the required attire of the organization is going to be. And I will tell you, you cannot dress too formally. You can definitely dress way too informally. And that's all part of impression management. And David and Rosie addressed that in the previous webinar as well. So make sure that you're ready to show that you're prepared, that you're considerate of the other person's time. And by being really prepared, you're going to show that you're comfortable being a leader. You are taking initiative. You've got the time planned out. You're considerate of the other person's time. And that is going to make a lasting impact. Here are the 5 steps for a great 20-minute networking meeting. And it almost sounds like, how do we accomplish that much in 20 minutes? But you really can if you follow these steps. And I will say there is something to be said for moving through really meaningful content quickly that might leave the person you're meeting with like, hey, I want to learn more. I want to meet again with this individual because they're so intriguing and they were so well organized. And I have more ideas that might come to me after this meeting that I want to follow up with. So it is completely possible to accomplish everything on this page in 20 minutes. These are the steps: making a first great impression, having a great overview, conducting a good focused discussion, wrapping up in, believe it or not, around 2 minutes, and then afterwards stepping back to follow up. And that's an important step that I think a lot of us overlook is the follow-up. We just think like we're done, we left the meeting room, but following up and tracking all of your activity is really, really important. So step one is making a great first impression. And the way we do this is thanking the individual for their time and a little bit of just interaction that's a bit more personal. So on this step, you will have wanted to do your homework. Be a detective. Find out everything you can about the person you're meeting with and find everything that you can about where they work. So look them up on LinkedIn, Google their name, go on to the website of the organization that they work for. And common things that you could bring up are if you've got any connections. So if they know somebody that you know, you're connected to the same people on LinkedIn. If you both went to the same educational institution, or if you have common certifications, those are all really great introduction things to bring up. And the reason it's good is because it's part of that relationship building where you're establishing rapport. And it also shows that you did your homework, that you care enough about this person to find out about them and make a genuine observation about them. A couple of things that we shouldn't be doing in our introductions, asking people to meet with us, or our first great impression intro. Do not ever ask someone for a job in a networking meeting. It will shut the meeting down. It will not take it where you want it to go. Do share a one-page networking profile. And we covered this in the session about resumes. And just before we leave this page, this entire process should take 2 to 3 minutes. So this is quick, which is why you need to have it planned out. Hopefully you remember this from our resume writing session when we talked about all of the resources that you need to be successful in your job search. So one of the reasons this document is so important in networking is because it's a really high level overview. When you send someone a resume, it's going to make them feel like you're asking them for a job, which isn't going to help their minds go to the place of like, who else could I introduce Lisa to? What other industries do I have connections with that she's interested in? That's where you want to get someone's mindset when you're networking with them. So this one pager, and you have the template for this in under the webinar, the buttons under the resume webinar. But this is just a template where you can high level list, again, your professional summary. This is how you're going to introduce yourself over and over, whether it be a job screening on the phone, whether it be an interview or in a physical networking session or a networking session via Zoom or Teams or whatever other type, Google. It lists your expertise and your key successes on the right-hand side. Again, this is just a snapshot. It's for somebody to read in like 2 or 3 minutes and go, oh, okay, I'm really happy to help this person. They have a great background. I will say the bottom section under the blue line that says target opportunities, this is where you're going to get the most engagement from the person that you're networking with, because this is what's going to get their mind going on who do I know, what industries do I know, in terms of where this person is looking to be connected to. I highly recommend sending this out ahead of time and then bringing copies to your meeting as well. And again, this just signals that you're truly networking, you're interested in building relationships, and you are prepared and you have the right tools to be in a networking meeting. So step 2, your overview of yourself. 60 seconds. Can you do this in 60 seconds? Yes, you can. This is going to be kind of turning your professional summary from your resume and LinkedIn, turn it into first person. So I have this background. I have accomplished that. I'm going to give you an example in a minute. But again, this is 60 seconds. I highly recommend that you practice this out loud in the mirror, making sure that you are comfortable enough to smile while you're providing your introduction. And after you get that done and you're comfortable, practice in front of friends and family and ask them for feedback. This 60-second introduction can make a world of difference in terms of what happens in a job screening, in an interview, and in a networking meeting. Here's an example. This is an example of a real life person. He's a wonderful man who recently relocated to the United States from Afghanistan. His name is Anwar, and he's given us permission to use this information. Here is his winning introduction. I am a leader, and obviously he would say his full name. My name is, I am a leader in the nonprofit sector with over 15 years of experience with Equal Access International. I led the development and technical design of the proposals with my business development team and was awarded 90% of the project funding that we requested. I'm known for my outstanding team management, relentless positivity, and the ability to motivate, train, and build organizational capacity. I am seeking an opportunity to leverage my unique background of extensive leadership skills, bilingual language abilities, high levels of motivation, and energy to serve an organization or community agency. Then you move on to step 3, which is having a great discussion. This time limit is 12 to 15 minutes. So this is what you're really saving for. This is the heart of the conversation. You want to have a short but very organized and pointed discussion. So I encourage you to look at the networking book. Start on page 157. That has a really specific outline for how to go about planning out these 5 questions. And it's based on a really cool model of stating an observation and then asking a question, which again means you've had to do some significant homework and detective work. But there are examples in the book. I encourage you to look at them and have these written out or typed up, and with space where you can take notes so that when you do your follow-up, which is the very last step, you have captured really good meeting notes. Step 4, this is where you're asking for recommendations from people or from your networking contact who could introduce you to additional people. This can be really hard. This can be the hardest part of the meeting, and please be confident when you make this request. If you aren't confident asking others for help and support, I also recommend that you practice this step with a trusted confidant. So it can really feel like you're looking desperate, or I always worry like, oh, do people want to share other people's names with me? And it can be uncomfortable, but you know what? Remember, your contact said yes to you. They're meeting with you. Use their time wisely. They are likely expecting you to ask for something. And remember that they have likely been in your shoes before. And everyday business is around asking for what comes next. How can we help each other? And I think that's also something that might make it more comfortable, is this is about relationship building again, and it's about helping each other. So when we get to our last step, it's going to be about reciprocating. So you're not just here using up this person's time and asking them for support. You're going to offer them something. So you can feel good about that because you have it all planned out. What does it look like or sound like to ask your networking connection for additional support? Farzana, is there another human resources contact that I could talk to about HR certifications? Raina, based on the industries I am exploring, is there anyone else that comes to mind you would recommend I meet with? Anwar, do you know of someone else in the food industry that I could speak to? Carlos, is there someone else I could ask these same 3 questions that we've discussed today about marketing operations? Those are really specific questions. And so in being that specific, you're going to help, again, that person connect with potential answers to those questions. So one thing that I would encourage you is that make sure these questions about what someone can offer you are really specific, or as specific as you can make them, so that they can respond. I just mentioned reciprocating. So your 5th question is, how can I help you? Or what can I do to help you? This question, I don't think it gets asked often enough. I think people who are experts in networking expect it. I think others who aren't maybe as familiar with networking, it can be a very welcome surprise. I would say either way, you might be dealing with someone who has read Marsha's and Nathan's book or are very seasoned networkers. They're going to expect it. So if you don't ask the question, it won't reflect well on you. If they don't expect it and you ask it, it just makes people feel so gratified that they've met with you. So it creates a sense of pure relationship, for one thing. So you're not just begging someone for something, you also are bringing something to the table. And that results in reciprocated respect and consideration. So letting this be the final impression of you is very powerful. When I started networking, I thought, oh my gosh, what on earth do I have to offer? I'm the one who needs the job. I don't have any connections in Minnesota. I moved here, lost my first job right away. Like, what do I have to offer? Well, we can all offer something. Here are a few ideas. You can be prepared with contact names. Again, this is going to go back to how well you do your research. So you could have some potential contact names in your own network who have similar interests or work in similar industries. I would say the second bullet is probably your most sure, reliable bet. So you can research articles that are relevant to where the work that your contact is doing. You can research articles about the industry that they're in, or even specific articles about maybe current undertakings of that industry. The third one's a little more difficult. So it says arts and crafts. This one, I am not a creative person, so this was one that I've never been able to pull off. But if you are a creative person and you have something meaningful that you make, that you can offer, it could be a blank greeting card if you design greeting cards. I often bring a book that has been written by one of our facilitators and supporters. Her name Rosie Sarpong Owens. It's called Apples in a Seed. It's about really famous leaders who overcame a lot of obstacles to fulfill their potential. Now, not that book costs me money. But that's something that I bring to networking meetings. And then I'm just going to show you. I'm sorry, I didn't have this right at my desk, but this is one of my favorite examples of a gift that I got from one of our volunteers. Her name is Gabriella, and she's from Ecuador. And she gave me this handmade, just beautiful knitted. It's a pen with a cover of a little girl on it from Ecuador. And this is something that means a great deal to me, and I keep it out where I can see it. So again, I think the arts and crafts is something that's a little harder to pull off, but it is a suggestion. So in terms of reciprocating, I feel that part of reciprocating is just part of your follow-up. It's the very beginning of your follow-up. So always, always, always send an email thank you. Do it within 24 hours. Do not let it go past 24 hours. Written thank yous, unfortunately, are kind of a thing of the past. And because of that, it can get you noticed. So I strongly encourage you to send a written thank you note. You can look up the company's address, and put, address it to the company address with the person's name that you met with. And I guarantee you that will make a difference. Again, we've talked about sending articles. Like, I think sometimes it's hard to have an article with you the first time you meet with someone. But if you follow this process and you take good notes, you will likely be better position to go find an article that's relevant to this person and interesting to them after your networking meeting. So that's also a really cool way to follow up and get noticed and reciprocate is thank you for the meeting. In reviewing my notes, I thought that I would look up this information. Here's an article that you may find helpful. So in closing, make sure you do something with the information you're given. If you meet with someone and they never hear from you again, the chances of them using their own relationship credibility to introduce you to others is probably zero. So that's the other thing to think about is you want to build trust and you want to build confidence to the point that the person you've met with is comfortable making introductions to other people on your behalf. So make sure you follow up. Do something with the information that you're given. Which leads us to our last page, which are the specific steps of following up. And I encourage you to block time on your calendar to do this. So if you block 90 minutes to do an in-person networking meeting, so travel time there and from the actual meeting, make sure you take some of that time to sit down and follow up. Otherwise, it can be 3 days later or a whole week later, and you're saying to yourself, oh my gosh, oh, I totally forgot to follow up with that person. And then you've probably, your chances of getting another meeting or getting additional follow-up, it's not going to be a good situation. So take 20 minutes to follow up after each meeting. Schedule it on your calendar so you have the space and the time to sit down and do the work. Send a thank you note, either email and or handwritten. Send a thank you note to the person who introduced you to the person you met with. So this is huge. And most people do not do this, and it makes a really big difference. So if I've taken the time to introduce someone to a potential networking contact and they meet with them, and then I hear back from the person that I introduced, like, Lisa, thank you so much. I met with Carlos. It was a great meeting. Here's what we're going to be doing next. That makes the person who introduced you to the networking person feel like, oh my gosh, that was so worth my time. They got something out of it. They cared enough to follow up with me. So do not skip that step. Don't skip that step, because you're going to want to keep going back to that person and updating them and continuing to build relationship with them. And then we didn't talk in detail about this, but make sure you're tracking your activities. So this third bullet is add information into your networking tracker. It can be a journal, it can be an Excel spreadsheet if you like Excel, it can be a Word document. Track what you're doing somehow, some way. Who did you meet with? Who introduced you to that person? When did you follow up? What are your next steps? If you don't do that and you're meeting with a lot of people, you are going to lose complete track of who you know, how you got introduced. I can tell you from experience, there is nothing worse than getting on a networking call and fumbling around in the beginning because I haven't looked up how I got connected to this person to begin with. And networking takes a long time. So you might get an email introduction to somebody and not meet with them for 3 or 4 weeks. So if you haven't tracked all of this and it's 5 weeks later that you're meeting, if you're like me, you'll be like, oh my goodness, I don't even remember how we got connected. So Prosperity Ready keeps a very large meeting and network tracker. Now, we're a nonprofit organization, so that's a little bit different. But I do encourage you to set up some kind of system for tracking who you're meeting with and how you got there to begin with. Also, part of your tracker would be making a note to follow up as appropriate. And then this next step is important, and this is why I recommend taking that 20 minutes to sit down and reflect. Really think about how you conducted the meeting. How did it go? What would you do differently next time? And please do not, this is all in the interest of improvement. You're going to mess up. You're going to have a meeting that could start horribly and great. You could have a meeting that starts great and just goes off the rails. That's okay. Use that experience to reflect on how did that happen and what can I do differently next time. Don't feel bad about it. well, sometimes I let myself feel bad for a couple hours, and then I figure out, like, what am I going to do differently next time? And then again, follow up with any new connections you were given. This again, 24 hours, 48 hours max to follow up with new connections. I typically CC the person who gave me the new connection. And then after that, you don't need to keep CCing them because they don't need to know all the ins and outs of how you're trying to schedule with the new connection. But I always do so and so thought you would be a good connection. Thank you, so and so, for the connection. And, would like to reach out to you in a separate email to schedule time to get together if you're interested. I know that was a lot of information. And thank you for tuning in. That is everything we had today on some of the really specific structures and approaches and processes for conducting a meaningful and a winning networking session. I hope you continue to the end of all these webinars, and we look forward to having you complete this training and wish you the best in your job search. Please reach out to Ahmed or myself if you have any questions about anything you've learned so far, or if you have questions about what comes next. Thank you very much.